welcome to the special edition of India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're coming to you from the Taj Palace in New Delhi, where we've just concluded the CNBC TV 18 Financial Inclusion Summit. The Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, was here to take us through what the government intends to do now beyond the Jan Dhan program that it so ambitiously launched. But we'll get to all of that and more in just a bit. Let's go across to Surbhi for the headlines. Surbhi.
Good evening, Shireen. Let's run through the top stories this evening. The United States, along with 11 other nations in the Pacific Rim, sign a historic free trade agreement. Will aim to do away with import tariffs among member nations. India's exports will be adversely impacted. OECD initiates a revamp of the global tax architecture, issues new global tax standards to reduce the shifting of profits from high-tax countries to low-tax countries.
The RBI having cut 125 basis points, we have not seen a sufficient transmission as we would have all liked to have seen.
Banks have not done enough to pass on the rate cuts from the central bank, says Minister of State for Finance Jayant Sinha. Says the cabinet will take a call on discom debt very soon, and also adds that the first fund from the NIIF will be to tackle stressed assets. Bumper rally to start the week on Dalal Street. Sensex surges over 560 points. The Nifty reconquers the 8,100 mark with ease as the appetite to take risk returns. Global markets also rally. Former chairman of the US Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, opens up on the 2008 financial meltdown. Says the Lehman crisis was inevitable. Nothing could have been done to avert it. That's a CNBC exclusive. India and Germany sign 13 MOUs as Chancellor Angela Merkel meets Prime Minister Modi. Germany pledges over 5 billion euros to India's solar mission. The government puts the onus on Invest India to cut the red tape for German companies. The RBI cracks the whip on Indian Overseas Bank, initiates what is called a prompt corrective action. IOB's return on assets have been below the 0.25% threshold for the 2 consecutive quarters.
But otherwise, there is no reduction in our margins of profitability compared to what it would have been if the investment had been made by us.
Maruti's chairman R.C. Bhargava allays fears surrounding the Gujarat plant, reiterates that the agreement with Suzuki will not impact profits and margins. That's an exclusive.
Technology is moving 3 to 5 times faster than management, which, if I said it was, I would argue with government, is probably 7 to 10 times faster.
Governments and corporates need to keep up with technological advancements, says the global CEO of McKinsey. NASSCOM tries to quell fears surrounding Indian IT, says the Indian IT industry will grow in double digits. And forget America and think China to further the startup revolution. WPP's Martin Sorrell speaks to 3 budding entrepreneurs on creating the next big mobile-first business.
This Danotsav week, please give generously of your time to suitable causes.
To me, the most important thing for our country and the people is the education, and especially the girls' child education.
The idea is if every Indian can inculcate the concept of giving in terms of daan, it will create a society that is far more better than the society that we live in.
Well, friends, I have always believed in sharing. Life is too short and too uncertain. Future generations will always remember you for what you have done for society and not because of your riches or because of what you achieved in life.
Joy of Giving Week is a great initiative. I think we should all contribute significantly to make this a great success.
This Daan Utsav, don't forget to do an act of good. Once you have done so, put this happy dot on your finger and spread happiness.
Formed a trust called the Akshay Patra Foundation. I've been a trustee. We worked together to build up this organization with a long period of time, over the last 10, 12 years. I made a personal contribution every year, including the first contribution.
and together we have made it the largest midday meal program in the world.
We have to ensure that to feed these children that we have taken up, we have to also ensure that there is a certain amount of fund flow, and so we have a very elaborate arrangement for raising funds.
Well, it is done. Utsav and CNBC TV 18 is proud to associate itself with the Joy of Giving Week. Through the day, we've brought you stories of individuals who do believe in the art of giving and are enjoying the joy of giving. Coming up next on India Business Hour, we will bring you a special conversation with the former chairman of ICICI Bank, N. Vagul, and the organization that he's supporting for the joy of giving. All of that and more coming up for you in just a bit, but let's go straight to the action on Dalal Street. It turned out to be a terrific Monday for our markets, and not just our markets, global equities also seeing positive cues today. We saw a 500-point rally on the Sensex and now edging closer and closer to 27,000. The Nifty above 8,100. It wasn't just the Nifty and the Sensex, even the mid-caps doing their bit in tandem. So it looked very strong for our markets. The question now is, will this rally continue? But of course, that wasn't only the big story that we've been tracking. There's been several developments, and a landmark development for trade deals across the world. Let's go across to Surbhi for the latest on the TPP. Surbhi.
Absolutely. This is the big one in terms of international news this evening, Shireen. Let's get you the details of the story now. The United States, along with 11 other nations along the Pacific Rim, have signed a historic free trade agreement. The deal will affect India's economy and more specifically its exports. But before we get to that, here's what the deal entails. The deal is between economic powerhouses like the United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, and 9 other countries who contribute to about 40% of the global economy. Now, these 12 countries will aim to reduce import tariffs to zero and open their doors to goods from partner nations. They will also attempt to write consistent rules for patent and copyright laws, environmental protection, and labor standards. The New York Times reports that with this deal, the United Nations will pivot towards closer relations with fast-growing Eastern Asia. And of course, Shireen, like we've been saying, this will have perhaps significant ramifications for India as well, not necessarily in a positive sense.
No, it may not necessarily be positive at all, Surbhi, because as we move towards more plurilateral agreements, the space for India when it comes to global trade is perhaps shrinking. And this is something that the government is cognizant of. In fact, the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, has been tasked with trying to put together the kind of agreements that India should prioritize, and that report is expected shortly. That's the word coming in from the Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, who is here with us at the CNBC TV 18 Financial Inclusion Summit. And I had the opportunity to ask him about the implications of the landmark TPP agreement on India and Indian exports. Listen in.
I think it's a very welcome development for the global economy because the more that we can bring down trade barriers and encourage trade on a level playing field among important trading and economic nations, the better off we all are. So far, I think all of the countries that have signed, it's a very important step forward. I know in the United States, it's taken them a long time to be able
8 years of negotiations.
Yes, overcome the barriers. So it's a very important step forward for the global economy. Now, for India, of course, we have to think very carefully about these multilateral trading agreements. As you correctly point out, it's not so much the WTO where a multilateral trading set of arrangements is being created, but much more these other arrangements that are being put together. And as you know, the Chief Economic Advisor has been tasked right now to look into all of these different trading blocks and to see what should be India's position and how we should position ourselves relative to the trading blocks that are emerging.
But do you feel that this in a way will sideline India? I also ask you this in the context of what is happening with the India-EU FTA. Talks there have been derailed. There is hope now in the air after the Prime Minister has met with Chancellor Angela Merkel today, and you spent a greater part of your day with her as well. Is there the possibility that we are likely to see a revival as far as the India-EU FTA talks are concerned? And as we head into these plurilateral agreements, is the space for India going to shrink?
there is space for India very much in these trading arrangements. There is tremendous goodwill for India and a real recognition that India is going to be one of the key contributors to global growth and for opportunity creation around the world. So everybody would like India to be part of these trading arrangements. What we need to do on our end is to understand, how we have to work through over time exactly, the various trading arrangements that exist, which ones we have to prioritize and how we participate in that. As I said earlier, that's the task that the Chief Economic Advisor is engaged in right now. He's actually one of the world's most eminent trade economists. So we are very much looking forward to his report on this matter.
Well, that's the Minister of State for Finance, Jayant, and I also asked him, as you saw there, whether we could see the possibility of a revival in the India-EU talks. The Foreign Secretary has said that that was an issue that was brought up by Prime Minister Modi in his conversation and dialogue with Chancellor Angela Merkel, and the Prime Minister has asked the Chancellor to exercise Germany's influence on other EU nations to try and revoke the ban against GVK Pharma. But speaking of Chancellor Angela Merkel, she is in Delhi and will soon be headed with the Prime Minister to Bengaluru. Today, 13 MOUs were signed. Let's take a look at what transpired between Prime Minister Modi and Angela Merkel.
That's the creme de la creme of corporate Germany exchanging notes with the External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj. A direct outcome of this was an arrangement to set up a dedicated window for clearing policy and regulatory bottlenecks faced by German companies in India. This agreement was formalized when German Chancellor Angela Merkel met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi later in the day. So too were 12 other MOUs which deal with issues ranging from clean energy to security to climate change to education.
I was very glad that we were able to sign this fast-track agreement here today so that the speed with which you provide licenses to companies to set up business here is increased. I think that's a very important point.
The MOU on solar power will see Germany extending low-interest loans worth €1 billion over the next 5 years.
I place great value on Germany's assistance of over €1 billion for India's green energy corridor and a new assistance package of over €1 billion for solar projects in India.
Both leaders have also agreed that German companies will be given access to India's rail infrastructure program. This should encourage greater involvement and investment by these companies in high-speed rail, station redevelopment, rolling stock manufacturing, and logistics terminals. Naturally, the stall free trade agreement also featured prominently in dialogues.
There was talk of the free trade negotiations which we have ongoing with Germany, with the European Union. This is the broad-based trade and investment agreement. So there was an understanding that we would go forward with the negotiations. Though, as many of you are aware, there was an issue of our pharmaceutical exports which had been affected because of an inspection report. So Prime Minister urged the Chancellor to use her influence to ensure that the right decision was made by the regulators in that regard.
The government hopes these MOUs will improve Germany's trade relations with India on 2 counts. 1, lift Germany's ranking from being India's 7th largest investor, and 2, boost Germany's share in the foreign direct investment kitty from the current paltry 3%. In New Delhi, with Rituparna Bhuyan, Ashmit Kumar.
All right, let's move on to some important news with respect to Indian Overseas Bank now. The Reserve Bank of India has cracked the whip on IOB. The central bank has initiated what is called a prompt corrective action against the bank. Now, this is initiated by the regulator when a bank's parameters like capital adequacy or bad loans or return on assets deteriorate below certain thresholds. We've got Lata joining in to explain all the details to us. Lata, why has IOB been placed in this category? What seems to be the prime cause?
The prompt corrective action is normally initiated by the regulator when some of a bank's parameters falls or deteriorates below a certain level. For instance, if the capital adequacy were to fall below 9%, if the net NPLs were to rise above 10%, or if the return on assets were to fall below 0.25%. Now, if you looked at Indian Overseas Bank's numbers, the last time when they reported their results for the June 30th quarter, the capital adequacy was 9.75, and thereafter they got some 2,000 crores capital from the government. So it may not be capital adequacy. Net NPLs was quite bad at 6.31%, and gross NPLs was almost 10%, 9.5%. But it's unlikely that net NPLs would have gone to 10%, though you can't tell, but it looks unlikely. It's the return on assets which could have been the problem. Even in the previous year ending March 2015, their ROA had fallen to 0.16%, and in the last 2 quarters it was 0.02%. So chances are that is the reason. When they come under capital prompt corrective action, one person from the Banking Supervision Department is on a daily, weekly touch with the bank, ensuring that they don't take costly deposits, that they don't access the market for CDs, that they don't make dividend payments, don't have extra staff expenses. So these are the corrective actions that the Reserve Bank has put in, probably to ensure that IOB comes back on track on ROA. Probably even NPL, we don't know because the second quarter numbers are not out. But these are usually the steps that the central bank takes.
Lata, thanks very much. So Indian Overseas Bank, their Reserve Bank, bringing in a plan for corrective action. We will try and get you more from the IOB management. Let's move on to another big story. It's a red letter day for global taxation. The OECD has put together its final report on BEPS. So from TPP at the start of the show, now on to BEPS. What are the implications? Joining us is Minka. Minka, take us to the highlights of the report, and then I'll come to you about the implications for India.
Well, Shireen, the BEPS, or Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project, is an attempt essentially, in simple English, to curb tax avoidance. Here's one example of profit shifting. The OECD says that MNC affiliates report higher taxes in lower tax jurisdictions. That's in countries that have lower tax rates. So almost double of the taxes that they report in higher tax jurisdictions. So essentially, you're moving profits from higher tax jurisdictions to lower tax jurisdictions. Here's another data point. The effective tax rate paid by multinational corporations is estimated to be between 4 to 8% less than the tax rate paid by companies that have only domestic operations. Now, OECD estimates that the revenue losses from such base erosion and profit shifting are between $100 to $240 billion annually. So that's between 4 to 10% of global corporate income tax revenue lost because of what is known as BEPS. Hence, in 2013, the OECD initiated this project by outlining 15 action points against BEPS, and today it has released reports that provide guidance and new standards on these 15 action points. Today's reports cover a range of issues, from tax challenges of the digital economy to hybrid mismatch arrangements, effective CFC rules. They also cover inappropriate treaty benefits, the artificial avoidance of permanent establishment. They cover more disclosures, as well as a multilateral instrument to modify bilateral tax treaties. They're comprehensive reports running into thousands of pages. Shireen?
Well, Minka, that was as far as the highlights of the report itself, but take us to the implications for India specifically.
Well, all corporations, including Indian companies, will now have to learn to live with more disclosures. So at the local level, to the tax department here, as well as on a country-by-country breakdown of revenue and profit. That kicks off in 2016. So more disclosures is now a given for companies across the world. But for a more detailed analysis of the impact, let's talk to Sanjay Tolia of PwC. Sanjay, good evening. Let's start first by asking you to list very quickly the key areas of impact for Indian companies as well as Indian multinationals.
Yeah, thanks, Minka. So I think the biggest thing for Indian companies is that clearly governments all around the world will be able to look at the big picture of the total value chain of an Indian multinational company. And I think the most important thing to note through the CBC reporting, which is country by country reporting, is that substance will come to the fore. So let me just give you an example. So in earlier days, if one was able to transfer risks through contracts, so contractual transfer of risk is something which is going to be totally discouraged through this BEPS program. And what will become important is that people who assume and manage those risks are going to be the people, are going to be the locations where the profits will be attributed. So contractual transfer of risk is going to be discouraged, and I think the place where the value is created is going to be the place where the profits will be taxed. And second thing, more for Indian companies, very relevant, is Indian companies doing business in foreign countries, specifically the common law countries where we had this commissioner agreements. And commissioner agreements are situations where a particular company could enter into a contract on its own account, but on behalf of the foreign principal, let's say, for example, India. So commissioner agreements were used to argue that there is no taxable presence and accordingly there is no profits attributable in that country. But with this new rules on permanent establishment, this commissioner arrangements will no longer be regarded, and in a place where a company is doing conclusion of contracts, that's the location where it will be deemed to be having a taxable presence.
So Sanjay, what you pointed out for me is country-by-country reporting, the enhanced focus on substance, and the provisions to prevent the artificial avoidance of permanent establishments. Three big impact areas for Indian companies. A quick follow-up question on that. There are also provisions for the prevention of tax treaty benefits in appropriate circumstances. Now, the Mauritius Treaty has been a big thorn in India's side for a long time now. I know that we have renegotiated it, but would it be politically much easier to apply what the OECD is suggesting, both as general anti-abuse rules as well as special anti-abuse rules, to ensure that there is no inappropriate granting of treaty benefits?
So OECD talks about minimum standards for bilateral agreements, and OECD also in its webcast today gave an example of US, that US has used most of the minimum standards for anti-abuse in most of these bilateral treaties. Countries which have not been able to have those minimum standards, which has led to double non-taxation, are expected to bring that in their arrangements and bilateral agreements with other countries.
That would include
and I think
India?
the multilateral agreement, that would include India, because India is part of the G20 who initiated the OECD. So we'll have to wait and watch that how India brings some of those minimum standards in its own treaties.
Okay, you spoke of double non-taxation. Let me talk about some of the concerns that companies have had with these OECD action points. One is the privacy of data and country-by-country reporting, and the other is the fear that with all countries getting more aggressive, you could in fact end up with double taxation. Do you think that's what this BEPS project will lead to?
So very interesting comment was made by the OECD today in the webcast that we don't want to go from one extreme to the other, which means we don't want to move from double non-taxation to double taxation. We want to stay at fair taxation. So I would expect that we don't move from one to the other, but remain at fair taxation. The second point, very interesting, is that privacy is the concern of most of the countries, because when you give the global value chain on a piece of paper, it's available to most of the tax jurisdictions. The way I look at it is that the transparency will be something which will be available to the tax authorities and tax jurisdictions around the world. There are going to be mechanisms of how these country-by-country documents are going to be shared. The way to look at it from a multinational let's take an Indian multinational standpoint, is that if the country-by-country reporting data is used to make certain adjustments, and those adjustments can become public. So that is the point in time when, if there are large adjustments which is a result out of this country-by-country report, then those adjustments could become public, and it could have its own reputation risk. So I think that's the part which a multinational company should be worried about, rather than documents being available to various tax jurisdictions.
We've got a final 20 seconds to go, so I'm going to ask you for the timeline. None of this, Sanjay, is going to happen tomorrow, day after, or next week. Even the multilateral instrument to amend all bilateral tax treaties is going to take about a year. So this impact, change in global taxation is going to play out over the next few years, fair to say?
OECD has a very ambitious plan. So OECD is talking about achieving the multilateral agreements by 31st December 2016. So that's the expectation. We'll have to see how the countries get together. I understand that India is obviously participating in this program very extensively. So things which will have to move through treaties will probably have to rely on this multilateral agreement, and things which action plans which can be implemented through change of rules in the domestic laws, for example country by country reporting, I expect that to happen immediately in 2016. So most of the countries have already adopted CBC by 1st January 2016. Maybe because India's tax year is April-March, we should expect CBC documentation implemented by 1st April 2016.
All right, Sanjay, thanks very much for joining us. Shane, I'm going to toss it back to you with a quick comment. You heard of tax adventurism, tax terrorism. Well, get ready for tax trauma. No fault of the government, but more news coming in from the tax space over the next year or two as all these rules change, align and adapt.
All right, Menka, thanks very much for taking us through what this means for India. And the team at North Block said that they were looking forward to hearing from the OECD. Now that we do have the details, we are awaiting the government's response. But speaking of North Block, a united front, Team North Block today taking us through what the government anticipates as far as growth is concerned. And the big highlights coming in there from the Finance Ministry was that the government does not intend to cut down on planned expenditure, even though revenue targets could be missed. Tax collections as well as the disinvestment receipts could see a shortfall. Sapna Das takes you through the highlights of what Team North Block had put up today.
It's not often you see the top brass of the Finance Ministry speak in chorus, but get used to it. In the first stage of what is to become a quarterly event, the secretaries of various departments in the Finance Ministry shared a stage, and the message is this. The government will meet its 3.9% fiscal deficit target this year. There is no need to cut planned expenditure, and the government is working on further improving the quality of spending to get better results.
I'm also anticipating the Expenditure Management Commission to come up with some suggestions. In fact, they were supposed to finalize the report by the end of the year. That exercise has been going on also, where I believe some very good suggestions are going to be made about how you need not necessarily save by cutting. You can also save by just better management of money.
But that's not to say that the Finance Ministry officials shy away from pointing out and addressing red flags to the government's fiscal consolidation roadmap. The Revenue Secretary, for instance, indicated there will be a 50,000 crore rupee shortfall in direct tax collections. He said this gap could have been wider, but for additional revenue measures on indirect taxes. Also, the government's divestment program continues to be uncertain, a situation that prompted a review by the Finance Minister last week.
A strategy and a roadmap has been internally discussed, and that all efforts are in that direction to maximize the collections under disinvestment. How much shortfall will be there? That is something which can be said at the end of the year.
The shortfall may be not more than 7% or maybe around 5% shortfall may be there. So in the target of 4.5 lakh crore, we hope to achieve the entire target, at least 14.5 lakh crore. We hope to achieve at least the revenue figure of 14 lakh crore.
The Finance Ministry has also quietly buried the 8% plus growth target announced in the economic survey. It now estimates growth at around 7.5% levels this fiscal.
As a country, we are poised to exceed 7.5% this year, and the indications are that it will.
The government has also come out with a further update on the amount declared under the black money compliance window to over 4,100 crores. Now, this is a modest increase from the earlier declaration, but factor in the amounts locked up under the HSBC list. And, according to the Finance Minister, the government stands to rake in as much as 4,500 crores in additional taxes.
The total income which is assessed out of the HSBC cases and the tax demand which is raised in this assessed cases is of 4,562 crore.
Clearly, the government is not holding back in its attempts to shore up its coffers. To contain the current account deficit, the Economic Affairs Secretary Shaktikanta Das added that the government will soon launch the two gold schemes in November. That's the gold monetization scheme and the sovereign gold bond scheme. Both these schemes will help in rein in demand for physical gold and contain its import expectedly. In New Delhi, Sapna Das.
Staying with news from the Finance Ministry, and this is the CNBC TV 18 exclusive tonight. The Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, who was here with us this evening at the CNBC TV 18 Financial Inclusion Summit, did say that the government would have liked to see banks do more by way of transmitting the Reserve Bank's rate cut of 50 basis points. The Minister also saying that while the government was reviewing the small savings rate framework, they would be prudent not to adversely impact small savers, and also saying that the National Investment Infrastructure Fund, or the NIIF, will launch in November, and one of the first funds from the NIIF will be to deal with stressed assets. Listen in.
As far as transmission is concerned, clearly the RBI having cut 125 basis points, we have not seen a sufficient transmission as we would have all liked to have seen. There are 3 or 4 factors that come into play here. One is that many of the banks will tell you that when RBI was raising, they didn't raise as much as the RBI did, and so they don't need to bring it down as much. So that's one factor. The second factor, which you all know about, is the small savings rates. There's been a lot of discussion about how to align those better with the repo rate, with other rates that are in the marketplace. So that's a second factor. The third factor, as we all recognize, is the reality of the balance sheets and the profitability of the banks themselves, particularly those banks that have low NIMs, net interest margins, use this opportunity to some extent to repair their balance sheets, to strengthen the net worth and so on. So that's a third factor that has to be considered. And then the fourth factor, which of course, as you know, that the RBI has been talking about, is this whole question of do you price on the margin or not? How is the base rate actually set? And so the methodology of setting the base rate, which will then result in a more efficient transmission, is also being considered. So these are all the 4 factors that impact how in fact monetary transmission happens, and on all of those fronts we are working hard to ensure that in fact markets work efficiently and quickly in this regard.
Here the Reserve Bank Governor said that one of the key impediments as far as monetary transmission was the small savings rate, and the Finance Minister has also said that the government is in consultation with the Reserve Bank looking at reviewing the framework of small savings. Today we had your entire team at North Block talking about the possibility of that review, and it seemed like it's a politically sensitive issue, a politically sensitive subject, so no timelines have been given as far as what we can expect in terms of the small savings rate review, and it is very clear that certain schemes and certain constituencies will be exempt from whatever review the government does decide to do. What is the thinking? What is the possible timeline?
My joke on this is that people have been looking for the rate cut in the wrong place. maybe the rate cut should be on the other side instead. No, of course, as you understand, there are a lot of people that are dependent on income from these small saving schemes. It's a very important aspect of their lives. So we have to make sure that we consider it in a way that is equitable, that is fair, and that is in line with what people's expectations are. So we are working through that, and let us see how that evolves.
As we know, are stressed at this point in time, and stressed because of loans that have been taken by corporates, and those loans have now turned into NPAs. Do you believe that the current situation with the Indian banking sector and a lot of these issues, while being resolved, are yet to be addressed completely? Do you believe that they will be able to address the challenges and the opportunities of financial inclusion given the stressed nature of their balance sheets?
Absolutely. You have to understand that the entire financial landscape is changing before our eyes. And whether you look at what is happening with the technology disruption, mobile wallets, digital wallets, whether it is what is happening with payment banks, now being licensed and being able to go out and offer banking products and services to customers and taking deposits, or what we're doing with small banks, where they will be able to become, instead of just being MFIs, deposit-taking institutions as well. The entire banking landscape itself is changing dramatically. So we are enabling many, many new players, many, many different types of players to enter and provide financial services. And that will ensure that there is a lot of competition for financial products and to be able to get to even the last person in the line and provide them access and convenience. So we think that this new competitive landscape is going to force all banks, whether it's private sector banks, whether it is payment banks, or even the public sector banks, to really raise their performance and their game, and we back that up with the KPIs that we have developed for the banks. So I think competition is really a spur to innovation, it's a spur to better performance, and it really will ensure that our citizens, our consumers, get the products and services that they deserve. So even while we are doing that, we are also strengthening the banks themselves and providing them with the capital so that they can heal and improve their balance sheets. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work on stall projects and Discom, so we're trying to take the stress off those balance sheets at the same time while we are motivating them to go out and compete.
Since you talked about Discoms, how soon are we likely to see the new debt recast plan? I understand that perhaps as early as this week we could perhaps see a decision by the Cabinet on that front.
We are working on it. You'll know soon enough.
We're talking about stressed assets, and this is something that you told me when we last spoke, and that was using the National Investment Infrastructure Fund, or the NIIF, to be able to deal with the issue of stressed assets. I know that the NIIF itself will be operational or will be launched in November. Where do things currently stand on formulating the guidelines for the NIIF to actually alleviate the pain of stressed assets?
We're making very good progress. We obviously would like to launch not just one but multiple funds through the NIIF before the end of the year. One of the very high priority funds that we would like to launch is a stressed assets fund, because what is happening is, as the banks themselves are going through the strategic debt restructuring and so on, they are ending up with equity in some cases, they are ending up with debt also that they may not want to hold, and so we want to create enough capacity in the market to be able to take over the equity, take over the debt as required, and again make it possible for the banks to be able to get those NPAs off the books at a reasonable price with the restructuring and everything else. So the NIIF also is a very important element of taking some of the stress off the banks.
Ben Bernanke has had a very eventful tenure as the chairman of the US Federal Reserve and will always be remembered perhaps as the man who possibly had the toughest job in the world. But he was the one on that hot seat, or in that hot seat, when the Lehman crisis unfolded with the collapse of Lehman Brothers. For the first time, he opens up on the 2008 financial crisis in his new memoir, The Courage to Act. CNBC's Squawk Box team spoke exclusively to the man himself on the 2008 crisis and its aftermath. And while he does rate his immediate successor, Janet Yellen, very highly, he does accept that the US Federal Reserve may have had a PR disaster of sorts in 2008.
I think the one thing that as I go back and think about what we did during the crisis, we were so engaged in trying to deal with the weekend emergencies and the chaos in the markets and in the economy. I don't think we did as much as we could have. We did a lot, but we didn't do as much as we could have to explain to the public what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I went on 60 Minutes. I did a bunch of things to try to explain what we were doing, but still out there was a lot of view that, oh, the Fed is just helping Wall Street, they're not helping us, and so on. And I think if we had done more of that, maybe some of that criticism would have been diffused. We need to see more help from fiscal policy, from other parts of the government. The Fed can't do it all. That's basically, that was the argument I was trying to make in the.
Right, I know for a fact that Kevin thinks that part of the continuing sluggishness in the 6th or 7th year of a recovery is because of the Fed, not their.
No, I don't really see it. But I would agree that a better policy would be a better mix of monetary, fiscal, and other policies. And the fact that the Fed is the only game in town means the Fed has to do too much. The Fed is being relied on too heavily.
Would you weigh in on what Stan Fisher spoke about just last Friday, which is this notion of should monetary policy be used to create or to worry about financial instability, in the sense that you would raise rates now in order to ward off some of the excesses that Joe's talking about?
Well, it should be a last resort, because you have to raise rates an awful lot, for example, to have the kinds of effects Joe's concerned about. And we don't even know very much about what the linkages are. I mean, arguably, if the economy is really weak because you raise rates too soon, that could cause financial problems as well. So the right thing to do first is do everything you can on the regulatory, supervisory, macroprudential front. And then, if nothing else works, then you can think about monetary policy. But it's really self-defeating to use the wrong monetary policy.
Except there's an assumption in there, which you've already proven wrong, and you were at the helm when this happened, which is you missed the bubble. You missed it, 07. Mm-hmm. Eventually, as the book chronicles, you come to see the seriousness of what's happening. Mm-hmm. What assurances can you give anybody in the public that the Fed will see the next bubble coming?
Well, you can't. You can't. But it wasn't, I think that misrepresents, what we saw and what we didn't saw. We knew house prices were really high. We knew the subprime mortgages were a problem. What we didn't see was the extent to which the financial system was endangered and driven into panic by that problem.
Well, that's the man who was right at the center of the storm that was unfolding back in 2008. Moving on, the Maruti stock came under immense pressure in trade today. This after brokerage Jefferies cut its view on the stock from buy to underperform. Jefferies believes lack of clarity on the arrangement with Suzuki for the Gujarat plant is an overhang on the stock. This also comes amidst reports that dealers are offering discounts of up to 1 lakh rupees for the new S-Cross. Speaking exclusively to CNBC TV 18, Maruti's chairman attempted to soothe some frayed nerves. He's upbeat that profitability and margins will not be impacted due to the pact with Suzuki on the Gujarat plant. He's also upbeat on getting the nod from minority shareholders as early as this week.
The situation is that the profits from Gujarat, which we will get by selling the cars made in India, will be the same as we would have got if we had invested in Gujarat and made cars there. With the difference that in addition, we will get the return on the extra money which we will have retained and not invested in Gujarat, which wouldn't have happened in the other case. But otherwise, there is no reduction in our margins or profitability compared to what it would have been if the investment had been made by us.
Phase 1 is up and running, Phase 2 is under construction, and now Phase 3 of the Mumbai Metro project is all set to see light of day. CNBC TV 18's Kevin Lee and Arvind Sukumar report on the list of successful bidders for this 33.5-kilometer stretch of the Mumbai Metro.
Well, I'm standing outside the office of the Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation, where contracts for the third phase of the Mumbai Metro have just been awarded. Remember, the first phase of the Mumbai Metro is already operational. To fast-track the process of the remaining phases, the MMRDA has decided to break up the 33.5-kilometer route into 7 packages, which have been awarded to different companies and consortiums.
The third phase of the Mumbai Metro involves a total investment of 20,000 crore rupees at the moment, and 9 consortiums have qualified in the pre-bid process. Now remember, this is the most challenging of the 3-phase Mumbai Metro project, as all of it will be underground. So to prevent delays, the state has broken up the corridor into 7 packages, with no one consortium being allowed to handle more than 2 packages. Here's how the cookie crumbles. Package 1, which starts at Cuff Parade and ends 3.95 kilometers away at CST Metro, was won by L&T and its partner Shanghai Tunnel Engineering. The next section, that's 4.11 kilometers from CST Metro to Bombay Central, will be built by a consortium of HCC and OSJC Moscow. Package 3 will run from Central Metro to Mumbai Siddhivinayak. The 6.4-kilometer stretch will go to a consortium led by Dogra Soma developers. Section 4, which spans 4.8 kilometers from Siddhivinayak to Dharavi, will be handled by a consortium comprising Continental Engineering Corporation, ITD Cementation and Tata Projects. The 5th section passes through the business district of Bandra Kurla complex. This 6.99-kilometer section joining Dharavi to the domestic airport in Santa Cruz will be built by a consortium of J. Kumar Infra Projects and China Railway No. 3 Engineering Group. This consortium will also be responsible for the next section, that's the 3.53-kilometer stretch between the airport and Marol Naka, passing through the international airport in Andheri. The last section, the 2.71-kilometer stretch from Marol Naka to the Seeps Business District, goes to L&T and Shanghai Tunnel Engineering, the same consortium that is in charge of the first section of this project. Contracts are expected to be handed out later this month, and work is expected to begin by January 2016. In Mumbai with Kevin Lee, Arvind Sukumar.
Well, from Mumbai now to technology and the road ahead for the tech sector. CNBC TV 18's Ronojoy Banerjee caught up with the global CEO of McKinsey and the top bosses of NASSCOM to find out whether the government's Digital India initiative is likely to pay off and whether managements, not just in India but globally, are ready for the kind of seminal changes that we're seeing in the tech landscape. Take a look.
Technology is moving faster than anything. Again, when I talk to the two different CEOs I talk to every day, when I ask what is the thing that worries or excites you the most, it's the first is always technology is moving 3 to 5 times faster than management. Which, if I said it was, I would argue with government, is probably 7 to 10 times faster. Just because it's just defining what it wants to do, what the consumer wants to do. Uber is one, exactly. The Airbnb, what they've done in the hotel industry. How do you think about taxing hotel nights for people? The other one is Alibaba, what it did in China. It went into the financial, they started to make loans to people, right? And they weren't a bank, right? And all of a sudden, at first, the central bank didn't pay too much attention, but given their scale, all of a sudden these guys became a serious financial institution.
This pace of change, we used to talk about a decade. In fact, in our report, we talk about the decade in review, right? There's no decade left, right? I mean, if you look at the change today, if you looked at, you talked about retail and how fast Amazon and others have come up. If you take retail banking, and I total the 6 large payment attackers in the world, they would be the 19th largest bank in the world today. Right? Taking almost 20% of the incremental retail banking spend. Right? Now that is up from nothing a few years ago. Right? That's the pace of change.
So that's the outlook as far as technology is considered. Don't expect a 10-year or a decade-long review because the changes are happening so fast. That's the view coming in from McKinsey. But don't think about the US and don't obsess about the US, but think about China instead. That's the word coming in from WPP Chief Martin Sorrell. Speaking exclusively to CNBC TV 18 with some of India's brightest startups, Sir Sorrell had this to say.
I'm a boring old fart who thinks about things in long term, right? So we've been at this for 30 years, and what we're trying to do is to build, or certainly let me personalize it, what I'm interested in is building a long-term enduring brand, not in and out, right? Not exit, start another one. I'm not a serial entrepreneur. At the age of 40, I decided to go out and start something on my own. But I want to build, I'm interested in building long-term brands. And that is very important in the context of what revenues and profits are, because part of the problem with a lot of the internet-based models, in fact, I spoke to somebody this morning, somebody known to one of you on this panel, who said, I'm interested in the old-fashioned things, revenue and profits. Sound familiar?
No, but at the end of the day, that's what it is going to boil down to. I mean, whether you're new economy, old-fashioned, new-fashioned, that's what it's going to boil down to. You have to put money on the table. It is going to be about the bottom line and the top line.
Yeah, I think the difference...
Or not just about the top line.
Yeah, I think the difference in traditional businesses and the internet businesses is that I think internet companies start off by trying to solve a problem first. Eventually, they will figure out a business model because they end up solving problems that exist today in a much better way, using new distribution online, on top of which they'll disrupt business models and create new models. And I think for that, you need 3, 4, 5 years to figure out, especially in a market like India that's so early. If you look at Facebook, Instagram, they took 6, 7, 8 years to get a healthy top line.
But you know, what I find a little bit worrying still is that I just don't hear enough entrepreneurs say, I want to build a brand that users love.
It's the Joy of Giving Week or Dan Utsav, and CNBC TV 18 is proud to partner with organizations that are trying to do good for society. Joining us today, two very special people, N. Vagul, the former chairman of ICICI Bank, and also with us, Lata Kumaraswamy of the Tanker Foundation. Let me just very quickly take you through what the Tanker Foundation does. It was formed with the sole objective of treating kidney-related ailments for those who cannot afford expensive kidney-related ailment treatments in the country. Let me go across now to both our guests. Mr. Vagul, thank you very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. You know, you've spent your life and your career as a banker, so you've always looked for bankable ideas, for valuable and for viable ideas. Take us through what you look for before you actually partner and give your money to a non-profit organization, a philanthropic organization. What is it that you look for?
Well, the history is that I was convinced that diabetes along with heart disease and oncology is going to be a major factor in the Indian health scene. And diabetes is something which is a silent killer, and is going to play particularly in the rural areas. My own anecdotal evidence shows that many people are in fact not even aware of the fact that they are nurturing this disease. And so when Tanker, I found that was providing assistance to the underprivileged for when of dialysis, I felt naturally attracted to them.
Mr. Vagul, you know, one of the reasons why people are hesitant to give their money to non-profit organizations or philanthropic organizations is because they don't know how the money will exactly be used. When you actually give your money, what is it that you look for in terms of the kind of impact that your contribution is going to make? And also, what are the measurement metrics, if any, that you consider?
Well, in the case of Tanker, the decision was pretty straightforward and simple. Tanker has got a limited focus. The limited focus was providing dialysis to the underprivileged sections of the society. There were no complications. It is the way in which the criteria they used for choosing the underprivileged people, and the installation of the dialysis machine and providing the dialysis treatment at a cost which is, I mean, in a way, when you compare the commercial cost of 2,000 to 2,500, they charge about 350 rupees, very heavily subsidized one. That really helped. So it's a straightforward proposition. It is backed by very eminent doctors and people who are really public-spirited and who really want to do something. So there are no complications, there are no cost of evaluation of the impact. It is a straightforward organization. It was easy for me to take a decision to be a party to that.
But let me talk to Lata, one of the trustees of Tanker Foundation. You know, you set up Tanker 23 years ago. What has been the hardest part of scaling up? And also, when you look at fundraising, what has been the biggest impediment that you've faced so far?
Well, when we started Tanker, I think the kidney disease wasn't being given much of importance. 22 years ago, the focus was on other diseases, and of course mainly in India, the communicable diseases. So non-communicable diseases did not really get that much of exposure or interest from the government. But over a period of time, when we started Tanker, we realized that there were loads of people who were underprivileged and who needed to have dialysis. At that time, our government was not offering dialysis, long-term maintenance dialysis for the needy. So we felt, okay, let us do something and focus on these people, because when you have kidney failure, you have only a form of treatment. It's either dialysis or it is transplantation. So both these are very expensive. Any normal person itself cannot afford the treatment very easily. A lot of people have lost their houses, homes, everything just to stay alive. So we felt it was important. Yes, the challenge was that credibility. I think it's something where over a period of time we built it up.
Right, Datta, as you pointed out, that this is a serious health problem. It's a problem that the government needs to sort of tackle as well. You've been working with the government of Tamil Nadu, but from a policy point of view, from a government intervention point of view, or perhaps even from a private healthcare sector point of view, in terms of participation or collaboration, what is it that you think needs to be done at this point in time? Because the costs are prohibitively high.
Well, I think the government in Tamil Nadu, yes, they are doing a lot. I think all India, yes, it can be scaled up. All governments can come forward to understand that kidney disease is not the end of life, and that, more dialysis units for long-term maintenance dialysis. The problem here is a lot of people who have kidney failure cannot have a transplant. Not all of them can have a transplant. Not all of them, can afford it or get the right donor or have a family member or get a cadaver donor. So ideally, yes, I think we need to open up more long-term maintenance dialysis units. We need to step up the organ transplant act. We need more people to come forward. I would really like if the government could say on driving licenses, God forbid if anything happens, that yes, we can opt in and say yes, we would like to donate our organs come what may. And this is something which I feel that it can be done on an all India scale.
Well, Mr. Bagal and Datta, thank you very much for joining us. More power to the two of you. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Datta, you were talking about organ donation, and here's my organ donor card. I got this a couple of years ago, and I hope that more people join, people like us, and do try and consider organ donation as an option. Well, thank you very much for spreading the message here on CNBC TV 18. On that note, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.